Alright, so before I start the video, I want to give some backstory about how this all came to be. This story was originally submitted to Bbusta by an unknown author for him to read on his channel, which he did in a video entitled One True Creepy College Story, which was uploaded on January 6, 2016. 3 years later, sometime in early 2019, B took the video down and privatized it for unknown reasons. Then around 2 months ago, I stumbled upon the story which was uploaded onto a blog, which I'll leave in the description, so I've decided to narrate it on my channel. The author has also submitted some pictures to go along with the story, so make sure you're looking on screen for when they appear. Sometimes it's the people you care about who frighten you the most, and the more you care, the more frightening they become. I was born and raised on the Hawaiian island of Oahu, and I'm a man of Japanese ancestry. From 2008 to 2011, I was enrolled in private Hawaiian college. One of its instructors, Professor Rothbard, I had known since 1997 and cherished as a good friend. He was a major reason why I chose to invest these years in this particular institution of learning. This man served as the academic advisor to 2 school-sponsored clubs. One was where students held roundtable discussions on philosophy, politics, and current events. I was the president of this group. Rothbard was also the advisor to PHC's chapter of Enactus. Many universities have an Enactus chapter or team. Each Enactus chapter performs a project and, at the closing of the school year, an Enactus team from each state travels to the US mainland to present the project to executives from major corporations who serve as the judges. During the incident I shall describe, Enactus went by another moniker, SIFE, Students in Free Enterprise. Professor Rothbard urged the students to attend the meetings of our philosophy club, and in September of 2009, one of those students of his showed up. "Trevor, you'll love this one," he announced as he beamed at me. Her name was Inga Johansson. She was reared in Tromsø, Norway. Yes, her father was from Minnesota, and though in her 20s, she happened to be several years older than most of our private Hawaiian college classmates. At the height of 6 feet and 1 inch, she loomed over my 5 foot 8 inch body. She informed us that she was a finalist in a nationwide modelling competition back in Norway in 2005. And for anyone who glanced at this blonde, it was not difficult to believe. One of the attributes that jumped out at everyone most quickly was that Inga speaks authoritatively. Some young women talk as if they are tentative in everything they say. Even when they staunchly declare something, they sound uncertain, as if they are asking a question. On the converse, everything that leaves Inga's mouth in public comes in the form of a firm assertion, even if she is unsure on the matter and interrogating otherwise. On the day we met, as we would learn from her tendency, Inga dressed herself in conservative casual attire. Although I would learn she sported a closet full of colourful clothes, being in black and white was her favourite. In spite of some pretenses at habitual formality, Inga's body language was not too uptight. She seemed very together and bold, subtly flirtatious. I remember the first joke she told me, which was at one of our philosophy meetings. She said that out of every signature she spotted on web forums, her favourite remained the internet, where men are men, women are men, and children are undercover FBI agents, alluding to FBI agents posing as children in chat rooms to root out child predators. I didn't find what she said funny, but Inga certainly did. She giggled to herself as she recited it. Because Inga shared in my love for Professor Rothbard, she decided to partake in a second course of his, this one going from January to May of 2010. By February of that year, Inga and I had become very close. Professor Rothbard treasured her company as well. He invited us to dinner at his home, where Inga gushed to him, "I think of you as my second father." And he replied, "I think of you as my second daughter." On that topic of outward confidence, Inga proffered that she obsesses about climbing into positions of authority and responsibility. It is, she whispered, with some uncharacteristic shyness, so that people won't notice that she feels the opposite of reliable and sane. If people saw her as successful on the outside, they would assume everything was fine on the inside. I assured her, it's very normal for people to want to be seen as responsible, and for them to nurture private doubts about themselves. She also volunteered a rather strange explanation about her name. She always had the last name of her mother, Lilith Johansson, and not her father. As she articulated, her father went by Matt Pennington, but that was not his birth name. He was born Matt Hockanen to Walt and Dorothy Hockanen. Upon discovering that Walt Hockanen was not his biological father, stated Inger, Matt changed his last name to Pennington, his mother's maiden name. As for the man's reason for moving to Tromsø, Inger continued, it was because he was disgusted by US military intervention in Vietnam. The USA was a place where he didn't want to be anymore. When it came time to put a last name on Inger's birth certificate, Inger's mother, Lilith Johansson, supposedly told Matt, if we name her Pennington, how do we know you won't just change your last name again? We'll give her my last name, it's simpler. Inger laughed as she recited this part of the tale. Throughout this telling, Inger kept up a huge smile, as if there was nothing particularly painful or difficult about what her father must have gone through. The same February, Inger came to Professor Rothbard and me in tears, whereupon she unloaded on us a distressing incident regarding a classmate of hers, a classmate who sat near her during Professor Rothbard's lectures. This was Seo from the nation of Myanmar. As Inger told the tale, she and Seo went to a bar late at night to acquaint themselves with one another. There Seo regaled her with some stories. She feigned approval, but secretly found them creepy. First, Seo boasted about being a tremendous womanizer, providing a litany of his various conquests. Second, he waxed zealously of his exploits for the Burmese military, claiming to have tortured enemy soldiers. Later that night, she continued, Seo walked her to the front of her apartment building in Waikiki, and they exchanged their goodbyes. A few minutes later, she received a call from Seo on her iPhone, where Seo announced to her, I accidentally locked myself out of my residence. Can I crash on your couch for the night? Seo's various escapades of bedding college women fresh in her mind, Inger demanded to know if his calling her was some pretext for getting into her apartment so that he could solicit sex from her. According to Inger, Seo chuckled and replied something to the effect of, No, I really did lock myself out of my home by accident. But if we end up fucking, that wouldn't be so bad. Inger told us that she consequently panicked and yelled, I don't have a couch. Seo got angry and they had a heated argument, but eventually Seo gave up. Still, Inger told Professor Rothbard and me, because of what he said about women and because of his war stories, I was afraid he wanted to rape me. Thereupon, she whispered that a few months subsequent to the argument, she drifted into sleep and dreamt as she woke to Seo cupping his hands over her mouth to muffle her screams, his other hand gripping a blade. Tears bubbling from her eyes before me, Inger said that in the nightmare, Seo ravished her and she complied with what he wanted rather than struggle against him. Through her tears, she whimpered, I want to believe that, in real life, I would fight back and risk dying, as opposed to giving in. Professor Rothbard and I did our best to console her. I suggested that she go to the security team of her apartment building, describe Seo to the team, and ask that they keep on the lookout for him. In the particular course Professor Rothbard was teaching to Inger and Seo, Rothbard had planned that the students be bunched together in groups of 4. The teams would compete in formal debates for that class. He ensured that she would not be placed in the same team with Seo. Normally, Professor Rothbard would not comply with such a request as, please don't let me be in the same group as that person because I do not like him. But because of the gravity of the charge against Seo, Professor Rothbard complied. Inger filed no formal complaints to the school, and she sternly insisted that neither of us report the incident to campus officials or the police. I reluctantly yielded to this command. A week later, Inger approached Professor Rothbard and me, and proclaimed that Seo vindicated her wariness of him. She told us that he followed up by approaching her and hissing,
If you tell anyone what happened that night, I'll kill you.
Inger said that Seo then smiled and broke out into a menacing cackle. It was clear she meant this. She was more afraid of him than ever, and I felt particularly protective of Inga. She wanted us to defend her violently if it ever came to that. As the spring of 2010 went on, Inger Johansson periodically bored me with overeager and nauseating memories about her ex-boyfriends back in Tromsø, such as Franz from Austria. She cooed, "You're really kind and sweet and care about me, just like Franz." She then turned from me and stared into nothing wistfully. She weirdly put the tip of her pinky between the outermost edges of her lips. In spite of her usually carrying herself with grown-up deportment, she often took on the body language of a 4-year-old girl, such as in this instance. She giggled and said girlishly, "Franz always joked he was a paedophile." I wanted to snap. That's sleazy, and I don't appreciate being compared to someone like that. But I didn't say anything. I just gaped, confused as to why Inger would want me to hear any of this. On another night, as we were about to leave her apartment for our date together, she blurted out of nowhere, "Why do people always get hysterical when they learn they have a child molester in the neighbourhood?" My eyes bulged out and I stammered, "What? What do you mean?" She elaborated. "Society is so bigoted against child molesters. If an 8-year-old girl has sex with an adult, the community should give consideration to the possibility that she consented to it." Inger maintains that a prepubescent child should be deemed legally competent to agree to sexual relations with a grown-up caregiver. No protestation could sway her on this. On yet another one of my visits to her apartment, she elucidated on her general fear of men. When she was 13 years old, her best friend, also 13, forced himself on her, reaching into her shirt through her collar and groping her breasts. Then on about 6 occasions, he begged her for much more intimate contact. She did not want to relent to his entreaties, but she only had one other friend, also a boy besides him, and she despaired that if she declined the boy's pleading, he would revile her and tell their other friend of this disappointment, casting Inger out of their priorities and leaving her friendless altogether. On the 7th occasion where the boy begged that she let him fondle her, Inger cried out, "No! I hate you, and I never want to see you again!" The boy burst into tears and fled. In the years that followed, they would silently catch sight of one another in the halls of their school. She would gawk at his new girlfriend, and fume jealously, wishing he would concede. "Inger, it is you who I love." One day, she and he crossed paths at an outdoor shopping centre. On impulse, she threw him a hug, and they stood in that embrace for several minutes. Afterwards, they stopped and resumed their diverging paths. In that entire duration, not a single word travelled between them. She told me that that was the last interaction she had with him. She attributed her fear of men and rape to these events. But to me, this didn't explain the fixation on child molesters in particular. Furthermore, Inger soon admitted that when she was small, years prior to the incident with the boy, she had already come to loathe her own femininity. She was not yet a tween when she concluded that female anatomy is sickening, rendering her weak and vulnerable to predation by males. "My unwillingness," Inger sobbed, "to get my friend to back off much sooner, hurt my self-image. I didn't respect myself." She grew numb, and to feel anything again, she resorted to slashing her wrists with a blade several times a day. This was her routine back in Tromsø. Inger kept making the wounds more and more obvious, and for a long period, those around the neighbourhood conducted themselves as if they did not notice. She was of two minds in this predicament. On the one hand, she imparted. She was disturbed that people didn't speak up to help her. On the other hand, she continued, it was good that people around her were like this because it made it convenient for her to continue the self-cutting and to escalate the damage. Around the same phase in her life, Inger frequented anonymous internet message boards and announced her plans to kill herself. It took strangers on the forum to talk her out of it. For more than 10 years, she desired to be dead. Unequivocally, she did not covet some afterlife where she ascended to some heavenly plane. On the contrary, she hoped that her death would amount to the extinguishing of her consciousness, that she would return to the same absolute nothingness that there was for her prior to her embryonic conception. She wanted to lose every memory of her experiences and to undergo no more sensations, to cease to be. Ultimately though, a schoolmate caught her as she was self-cussing, and unlike the others, this one had notified the principal. Officials had her consult a mental health professional, but it was mostly for the self-cussing, not as much for her other personal issues. And once the self-cussing stopped, the adults were satisfied and let Inger terminate mental health treatment around 2007. Inger gazed musingly into space and acknowledged to me that she could not have braved through any of this strife had it not been for the mental health professionals. Following hours of these reminiscences, I shuffled to her bathroom. Upon my rejoining her minutes later in the middle of her apartment, Inger put on a weird smile and shouted with her eyes bizarrely stretched wide open, "I am now fully recovered, and I did it all by myself." She then avowed that everything would have turned out for the best if the schoolmates had not snitched on her, if her mother never learned the truth, and especially if she never received psychiatric counselling. I wanted to remind her that she was contradicting what she had been articulating throughout the evening, but I apprehended that she was already exhausted from reflecting upon her past, and therefore I didn't point out the inconsistency. Then on still another night in April, Inger and I were telling each other about the sort of day we had. Very casually, Inger giggled and smiled and said, "Oh, Seo came around me." My relaxed posture instantly gave way to alarm. My slouch disappeared as my back straightened, tense everywhere. "What happened?" I pressed. She chuckled and answered that she was in the school library studying for Professor Rothbard's upcoming exam, and Seo strolled by. She got into a conversation with him, she recalled, and she smiled to me and remarked that Seo was such a nice, fun, friendly flirt. She seemingly held no memory of her prior accusation about him. Finally, Inger stared into space, giggled and said, "I like Seo." My jaw dropped open and hung ajar. I stared at her in that fashion for what must have been at least a minute. It felt like an eternity. Inger elicited no comment on the sudden silence. She simply began talking about a different subject. The next day, I marched into Professor Rothbard's office and said, "Do you remember when Inger told us about Seo threatening her?"
"Oh yes," Professor Rothbard replied. "How could I forget?"
I recounted to him Inger going over the conspicuously carefree conversation with Seo. As I spoke, Professor Rothbard elected to look at some papers related to his Scythe chapter. When I finished, he disinterestedly rasped,
"Oh yeah, that's weird."
As he said that, he didn't even look at me. His eyes were on the Scythe sheet. Hey, Professor," I raised my voice. "It's not weird. It's disturbing." Professor Rothbard shrugged us off. This greatly harmed my trust in him. Almost every day in the first 2 weeks of May, Inger changed what she said about Seo back and forth. First she went back to saying that Seo did proposition her and threaten her. A day later she talked about Seo being such a good friend. 2 days after that she went back to talking about him being a would-be rapist. Every time Inger switched what she said about Seo, she sounded as if she bore no recollection of what she expounded concerning Seo the previous time, even if it was the day before. In late May of 2010, over the weekend, near the semester's end, Inger simply broke out sobbing to me, "I don't want to exist." Upon some quick introspection, she ascertained that it was not in response to any immediate happening, that it was just her default mood. It epitomized her childhood in middle school and high school in Tromsø, and the sensation had been periodically returning, haunting her throughout the semester. She also mentioned how all men, especially American men, are lascivious and secretly yearn to rape her. She put her hands in mine and tearfully, she said, "Trevor, promise me you'll always protect me." I did as she asked, but as was becoming increasingly evident, the greatest danger to Inger was not anything external to her. She also reflected on her father, Matt Pennington, in a manner similar to how she spoke of Seo, as if he were two completely different opposite people, one being entirely benign and nurturing, the other wholly cruel and predatory. And in every instance wherein she reflected on this one single-dimension personality of a man, be it Seo or her father, her mind seemed unable to access her interpretation of that man's other personality. It wasn't just that Inger acted like Jekyll and Hyde. She reacted to every man as if he too were Jekyll and Hyde. Fortunately, she promised me that once she flew to Tromsø for the summer, she would pursue regular mental health treatment. I did not have a webcam and could not video chat back then, but when Inger returned to Tromsø in June, we were on Google Chat very often. As gently as I could, I queried as to whether she had yet made a renewed visit to a mental health professional. She brushed this off and sounded as if nothing of the sort had ever been deposited in her memory bank. When I reminded her of what she promised, she typed back that there was no need for fulfilling this, for everyone was fantastic and she was as happy as could be. I had to fess up. When you told me you would go back to periodic mental health treatment, I was greatly relieved. She typed back, ouch. Once Inger landed in Honolulu for the autumn 2010 semester, her symptoms intensified. Back in May, she had taken me to her apartment and showed me all the clothes in her closet and drawers. She had many tops of different colours. Except for 2 black garments, one of them backless, every garment was obviously distinct from the others. But in the autumn, she put on the exact same backless black top to class every day for over a month. Then, on her LinkedIn page, she uploaded photos where she was realistically photoshopped to look like a fresh corpse ready for burial, one experiencing pallor mortis. Her face was rendered chalky white, and this was not for Halloween. It was up year-round. On her LinkedIn page, she has up her resume and describes herself as a stable, responsible, ever-professional businesswoman. Next to that description is a photo of her photoshopped to resemble a corpse. I think some people assumed Inger was quote-unquote just being a goth or a fan of black metal music. But I have known goths. In high school, I studied under an eccentric public speaking teacher who was one. She wore black lipstick and was in her 30s at the time. There's always variations with individuals, but none of the goths I've known have given me the impression that they genuinely wish to end their lives. By contrast, for more than a decade, Inger has literally wanted to be dead. I therefore had to treat the corpse pictures seriously. By October, Inger had someone back in Norway upload onto YouTube a video where Inger delivers a monologue in English about being a fascist, quote, of the Fourth Reich, unquote, alluding to Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. Privately, Inger said this was a joke, but that it was supposed to be humorous was not obvious from the video itself. The description says news and politics. An English speaker who saw the video would be reasonable if he or she deciphered it as some indication that Inger admired something about the neo-Nazis. Again, it didn't behoove me to dismiss this as the sort of shitposting one might find on 4chan or 8chan, because Inger really has wished for death. I could not write this off as merely perverted satire. I noticed that around 2014, this bewildering video was finally privated. But the website known as Radarus still has a record of this video having existed, and Inger's real full birth name is still visible on the Radarus record. And it got worse. Inger showed me the publicly viewable live journal she wrote mostly in English from 2003 to 2007. A lot of it is about the self-cussing, and about how she wants to cuss her face up so severely that no one would recognise her anymore. I'm thankful she didn't slash her face, but with the corpse pictures, she nevertheless accomplished that part about being unrecognisable. There is also an early entry from 2003, admitting that she's disturbed that people act as if they don't notice the self-cussing, but that she also thinks this is good because it conveniences her ability to cuss herself. And then there is an entry from 2004 where she elucidates on her fantasy of killing her mother. Inger does not say this is some long-term conscious plan. No, she imagines one evening she will finally become so aggravated by her mother's nagging that she will grab a knife on impulse and plunge it into her mother. This was not the sort of dumb, terse, empty threat that regularly appears on Twitter or on Facebook, those along the lines of, "How dare you disagree with me? Go somewhere and die." No, the description of how Inger expects the stabbing to commence is long, graphic, and dire. Below that murder threat entry is a follow-up from 4 months later, where Inger says it, quote, "stings like a bitch," unquote, to read this pathological reverie, because now she's all better. But she wasn't. She told me how she often contemplates using her knife to extract violent retribution from parties in Tromsø who had wronged her. She was not specific about the identities of those parties. I have that murder threat open in the web browser at the very moment as I type this. Because the blog entry is from over a decade ago, I worry that people try to dismiss this as long past. Yet in the ensuing years, the gesture's indication and enduring fascination with violence and death and child molesters surged on, unabated. Fretful of the direction Inger had taken, I rushed to the local library and devoured its books on abnormal psychology. As these events transpired, Professor Rothbard put Inger into higher and higher positions of authority and responsibility. She became the president of his SIFE club. She made an official website for private Hawaiian college's SIFE chapter, and prominently exhibited one of her corpse pictures on it. I asked our mutual friends, most of them from private Hawaiian college, including members of its SIFE team under Inger's leadership, if they thought there was anything suspicious with respect to Inger's public behaviour. They admitted they could not miss the morbid gestures and were disturbed by them, but then they quickly added that they would never, ever, ever confront Inger about any of it. They were too intimidated. Inger was thin, but she also towered over them, and they did not dare to incur the wrath of someone who uploaded photoshops as ghoulish as Inger's. Besides, she occupied a supervisory role over some of them. These schoolmates maintained it would be rude and bossy to tell Inger not to perform these morbid gestures. I replied, "It doesn't have to be." When Inger kept making the self-administered wrist wounds more obvious years ago, she was playing a game of chicken. The idea that if no one called her on it, she would tell herself that what she was doing was perfectly normalized, and therefore safe and acceptable. It's important not to play along. That tactically reinforces these tendencies. I proposed telling her something like, "It's cool knowing you, and you bring value into my life. When I see the dark imagery, when I see the Fourth Reich video, I cannot help but think that you have a lot going on in your life. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. But I want you to know that if you ever do want to talk about it, I'm here for you." If you put it as that, it's not being bossy or demanding that she change, it's being caring. At the same time, it lets her know that of course you notice the morbid gestures, and that it's concerning. You're letting her know that she isn't fooling anyone, and that you aren't rejecting her as a whole as a person. The so-called friends scoffed at my recommendation, proclaiming that it would be too much trouble and that I'm a self-righteous jerk. I decided to make one more appeal to Professor Rothbard on the matter. Bringing up her shouting, "I like Seo," elicited a disappointing response from him months prior, but Professor Rothbard seemed too distracted that afternoon. Perhaps if I won his undivided attention, he would realise the gravity of the situation. I also mentioned to him that throughout May, she started switching back and forth on that on a nearly daily basis. Upon my having gone over these developments, Professor Rothbard sighed and lectured to me in a resigned, paternal tone. "Trevor, any girl her age would do that. All women are prone to scream false accusations of rape." Then he started telling me horror stories about his ex-wives. The extent of his misogyny stunned me. Something in the man's psychology draws him to damage women, and he assumes all females are like that. I thought, is he including his own daughter, his real daughter, the first daughter, in that category? I tried to talk to him about a compassionate intervention, and I told him why playing along, acting as if the morbid gestures are safe, reinforces the pathology. He got defensive, and said that by always acting as if everything Inger did was safe, he was the one who was being supportive. I had known that professor since 1997. My opinion of him has never recovered after this conversation. I resolved that there might be another route. On Twitter, I noticed Matt Pennington following a rather strange woman in Minnesota, Judy, who was apparently in her 50s. When I got a gander at this Judy woman's Angel Fire website, it said she ran a non-profit for at-risk youths who suffer from suicidal depression, nurse body image issues and gender identity issues, and cut themselves. I thought, these are Inger's symptoms. Who is this Minnesota woman? Perhaps a psychologist from whom Mr. Pennington sought advice about Inger some years ago? I reached out to this woman and confessed to her that I was worried for a friend. I also inquired if this Minnesotan woman was a psychologist. I mentioned that I feared that maybe she knew my friend, and therefore she might evaluate it as a professional conflict of interest if I approached her about someone she knew. The Minnesotan replied that she is not a psychologist, and she wanted to know what bothered me. I disclosed it to her. I didn't provide Inger's name, but I did state that my then unnamed friend's father was originally from Minnesota, and that my friend was born and raised in Northern Europe. I didn't specify the exact country. I also went over the suicidal ideation and the corpse pictures, but I didn't bring up the obsession with child molesters, the dynamic with the boy at age 13, or the frequently reasserted belief that American men are just itching to rape her. Minnesotan Judy replied, I figured you're talking about my niece, Inger. Judy remarked that this was quite strange, because what I had revealed was both familiar and unfamiliar. It was unfamiliar because Judy was not aware that her niece, who dwelt in ocean's distance from her, carried this burden. Yes, Aunt Judy said, this was familiar in one respect. Judy assembled that website and founded that non-profit organization because the symptoms she described were her own. Aunt Judy went on that she herself had attempted suicide in 3 separate instances. This disclosure is even on her Angel Fire website, though I hadn't read that paragraph prior to contacting her. Judy said that when I described Inger's issues, it was as if I were reciting Judy's own life story. Before I could raise any topic pertaining to the child molester obsession or the phobia of men, Aunt Judy inquired if Inger was bedeviled by any extreme hang-ups concerning sex. This startled me. I wanted to know why that was one of the first questions Judy advanced to me. Aunt Judy stated, sexual abuse is common in my family. Both an uncle and cousin of hers killed themselves, and the other relatives long suspected the uncle and cousin were child molesters. In the beginning, Aunt Judy told me she planned on talking with Matt Pennington, her half-brother, about this. But then she quickly changed her mind, imparting that although she grew up with Matt Pennington, he remained a stranger to her. He is terribly secretive and doesn't show emotion. His face is usually blank. Judy said this was not a moral condemnation, but she doesn't respect his judgment. Therefore, she concluded she planned on having a heart-to-heart directly with Inger. Aunt Judy went through the following cycle. About every 3 weeks or so, she told me she would finally have the talk with Inger. Then she would say something else came up and defer this plan. She didn't go through with it. Then, unsolicited, Judy started emailing about something else. First she wrote about Matt Pennington, then Matt Hockinen, learning the truth about the circumstances under which he was born, him being the result of their mother's extramarital affair. As you can imagine, Matt took this much harder than Inger let on to Professor Rothbard and me. Matt eventually tracked down his biological father and met him, but the man wanted nothing to do with him. Crushed, Matt thereafter departed for Tromsø, which he had made his new home. Judy was unclear on the precise reason why Matt changed his name to Pennington, other than that it must have been, at least in part, due to his feeling forsaken by the man who raised him. Seemingly out of nowhere, Aunt Judy emailed me that she herself was sexually abused as a child by Walt Hockinen, Walt being her biological father and Matt's secretly adoptive father. In Judy's estimate, Matt must have been aware of the sexual abuse the entire time. But when she tried to talk with Matt about it, he replied, unconvincingly, that he could not recall anything of that nature. Shaken by the news, I asked Judy if Inger had ever been left alone with Walt. Judy replied, yes. During Matt's return visits to the United States, Walt had babysit Inger alone on a number of days. I do not doubt Inger's story about her friend forcing himself on her when both he and she were 13 years old, but that does not account for the enduring focus on child molesters specifically. I began to wonder if maybe when Inger ascribed her fears about men and sex to the incidents from when she was 13, she still omitted another likely cause, something that happened to her years earlier. Then, over the next few weeks, Aunt Judy went through a new phase. She told me that she would initiate that caring talk with Inger after she took care of her own business with her own father. Judy wrote out a draft of a snail mail letter she planned on sending to her parents. She emailed the draft to me and I retained possession of it. The letter is to confront both parents with a description of the sexual abuse in graphic detail. While most of the grievances are directed towards Walt Hockanen, the letter also reproaches Dorothy Pennington Hockanen for looking the other way, being an enabler to Walt. Yes, at the last minute, Aunt Judy decided against sending a note. She rationalised that Dorothy is too old and therefore such a distressing topic would harm her health physically. At that point, Aunt Judy became somewhat unresponsive and rude towards me. I suspect it finally occurred to Judy that if she looked further into the matter with her niece, she might uncover something incriminating about Matt Pennington, and then there would be no plausible deniability. I was alone when I tried to engage in that compassionate talk with Inger. She had previously told me of the times her ex-boyfriends pegged her as a lying, cheating whore, and she just laughed. I did not express moral disapproval. I informed her that I was concerned her symptoms had taken over and that this was unsafe. She reacted as if my confronting her was the most evil, hasteful atrocity perpetrated, and my speaking with her on this aroused more anxiety from her than did her once believing that Seo intended to assault her. Then suddenly in the conversation, she feigned memory loss. She pretended there was no retention of her having told me anything of her past, and she wanted me to act as if there could not possibly be any connection between her corpse pictures and what she said previously of wanting, since childhood, to be dead. For my own safety, I had to sever contact from Inger, but I never stopped caring. And on into 2012, she kept insinuating herself into my social sphere, people who I thought were my friends, but behaved as Inger's psychopaths when she was around, and tactically treated the public morbid gestures they witnessed as if they were safe. Prominent business executives and prominent elected officials indulged in that. It was noxious. To avoid run-ins with Inger, I had to be a complete recluse. In the summer of 2012, Inger returned to Tromsø to keep near her mother. Entertaining the prospect that maybe the passage of time might have offered new insights, I decided in July of 2015 to think over these events once again. At that point, I noticed Inger posting on the Bigger Pockets real estate networking forum. She finally stopped using the photoshopped corpse pictures. She looks alive and is beautiful again, except that her grin looks more maniacal in her new photo than it looked any time I saw her up close. The smile seems phony and reminded me of the Jokers from Batman. I wanted to believe that Inger ditching the corpse photo signified recovery on her part, but she unmistakably underwent another conspicuous change. She is going by the name Inger Johansson Pennington. People might consider that a touching tribute on Inger's part to someone important to her, but given Inger's obsession with child molestation, and in consideration of what Aunt Judy revealed about the patriarchs of the family, I think the name change is not a good omen. It seems to me to be yet another morbid gesture, albeit one less obvious than those previously exhibited. On the Bigger Pockets forum, Inger happily proclaims herself an ambitious real estate investor who owns a parking garage and, bizarrely, putting up images of New York City architecture. I remembered what she had told me earlier, that she tries to come across as having lots of authority and responsibility, overselling it exactly because if everyone projects that image of her, no one will question her. She's trying to network with people near her. If those people become very close, they are in danger that Inger may repeat the Seo incident with them. I noticed Inger's mother, Lilith Johansson, on Facebook. As I think Inger already mentioned me to her, I sent Lilith a private message reintroducing myself. As gingerly as I could, I told her of the morbid gestures Inger had displayed during her stay in Honolulu, and I gave the URL to the murder threats Inger wrote for her. Hours later, Lilith Facebook blocked me. It felt tempting at that juncture to say, if Mrs. Johansson is going to be like that, then I guess she doesn't deserve a heads up about the hazards that await. But the truth is that Inger's mother is not the only one at risk. Inger could falsely accuse someone in Tromsø of sexual harassment or violence towards her, ruining that person's life. I wrote to the Tromsø police about the still online homicide threat. These police were not especially responsive. I additionally wrote to the police in Minnesota on this matter. First I mentioned Aunt Judy informing me of her having been sexually abused by Waltz Hokkanen and of my storage of the emails that describe this in detail. I then explained that Judy's niece, Inger in Tromsø, still has online her murder threats against her mother. I went over Inger's fixation on child molesters and how, subsequent to learning new details from Aunt Judy, I'm concerned that Inger's morbid gestures might be connected to what Waltz Hokkanen allegedly did to Aunt Judy. Finally, I explicated my concern over the remaining perils of Inger's condition going untreated. The Minnesotan police told me that they cannot take action here unless Aunt Judy approaches them herself. Sadly, it's unlikely she'll come forward. I fear Inger very much, but that does not diminish my wish for her well-being. I am afraid, both for her and of her. Absent of an intervention, it's likely she will one day do something extremely dangerous, possibly acting on her threats against her mother, or falsely accusing someone else of a crime. And the target of any violence on her part could still be someone other than her mum. It could be anyone to whom she feels emotionally attached. Inger might take this dangerous action tomorrow, or she might do it 15 years from the date on which you listen to this. But if there's no compassionate intervention, it will happen. Hey guys, it's Mr. Irish Pasta here, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. Damn, that was a very long story. It's probably the longest story I've ever narrated on my channel so far. I really hope you all enjoy this. Yeah, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you want to read the post yourself, the link will be in the description. And if you have any stories that you want me to narrate on my channel, feel free to send them into my email, which you'll find in the description below. Again guys, thanks so much for watching the video, and I hope you all have a good day.